Hello there. Thanks for joining me again today on our little program, Dr. Teach Me to Parent. And remember, it's based on my book by the title, Dr. Teach Me to Parent. Pick that up on my website, or you can certainly pick it up on Amazon.com and get your own copy. If you're a parent, if you're going to be a parent, if you're a grandparent, this is the book for you to help you put into perspective some good parenting skills and deal with issues that we all face within our family. Okay, now, Teach Me to Parent. Here we are. We're going to have a wonderful guest for you today, Carolyn Lynn, who is a local artist and a local author, and has quite a story to tell about her own personal family life and living in a family with a husband that was mentally ill. So if many of you out there have family situations that are difficult, you may not have mental illness, but you may have difficult problems that you have to deal with. And we're going to glean a little information and some insight and some wisdom from Carolyn today as we talk together on your own experience of being a wife and a mother and living in a home where the mental illness prevailed, unfortunately, but that's the way it was, wasn't it?
That's right.
Carolyn's written two books that we want to bring to your attention. Heaven is Amazing, and on her website and in Barnes & Noble. A great topic and a great dialogue on the topic of what is heaven like, if you will. And then the book we're going to be discussing today, Loving a Beautiful Mind, Schizophrenia, An Amazing God. So she wrote this book and as her life story, as her marriage story, as her family story, and living with a man that was schizophrenic and had mental illness. So this is the story, and this is a great book for summer reading. So pick it up. It's on the screen there, Amazon.com, or obviously from her website, which is on the screen as well. Carolyn, welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to have some fun today and talk about your own personal life a little bit, and as you wish to share with us, okay? Now, you were raised in Minnesota. Well, let's go back to your early beginnings in the cold country of Minnesota. What was your family like? Tell us just a little synopsis of kind of family life in Minnesota.
My parents were both second-generation Swedish immigrants.
I see. Well, that was good. That was a good start.
Right. You understand that,
Yep.
don't you? And they had wonderful values. They were strong, hardworking people. My father especially had a lot of difficulties to overcome in his childhood. He lost his mother when he was 2.5 years old. And then he lost his father in an accident when he was 13. So from then on, he really was on his own. And this was in the early 1900s. He was born in 1897.
Mm-hmm.
And he had tuberculosis when he was in his early 20s and was put in a sanitarium. And there he began to share scripture with some of the other patients and developed a time of Bible study with them. And from that led him into a call to the Christian ministry.
So he actually became a minister.
He became a minister, right.
You know, it's an interesting history in a way because you lived a life of great trauma and great difficulty and strain and stress, and your father did too. You almost wonder if there was kind of a preparation for you.
Oh, definitely.
You know, from him that helped you deal with your life.
There was. And the faith that my father had through all of the circumstances of his life was amazing. From that time when he was 22, he had to go back to school.
Mm-hmm.
He had to go to college. He had to go to seminary. And he had no funding. He was an orphan, and he had. It was very difficult for him. And so he overcame those difficulties, and he came out of the seminary. He met my mother, and she happened to be a music major. She had graduated from the University of Minnesota in music, and so they were a good combination,
Sure.
a pastor and an organist.
Sure.
Although she did not have that organist position in very many of the parishes he served. But he, they were very much in love, and they had 3 daughters. And my oldest sister, interestingly enough, or I think this was another circumstance that led to the strength of his faith and their faith. My oldest sister was born with a congenital difficulty, a congenital problem where she had no femur socket.
In the hip area.
Yes, and so at the time she
Yeah.
was born, they saw she had one leg that was just shorter,
Dangling, so to speak, yeah.
dangling, exactly. My parents took her to 9 different doctors, and they all said, well, she'll never walk. She has nothing to stand on. When she was about 18 months old, she fell off of either a stool or a high chair, and interestingly enough, that bone started to grow. My parents had been people of faith and prayer and certainly had prayed so much. The bone started to grow, but it came in at an angle that wasn't correct.
Sure.
And pediatric orthopedics was just developing at that time. She was able to go to the big city and have surgery on that leg where they stopped the growth in the good leg so that the short leg could catch up. They did 7 surgeries on her during a 9-month period, and she ended up coming within an inch and a half of having equal sized legs. So she's always worn a little lift on her shoe. But this whole experience was a trial for my parents, but their faith brought them through that, and she became very well educated. She went to nurses training, she went through college, she got a master's in philosophy, a master's in theology, and a doctorate in ministry, and has had a wonderful life of service in the church.
You know, when you look at that family history of illness and trauma and just great stress and strain, you know, you all look at it from sorry for you. You know, you feel badly.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you learn from that.
Yes.
You rise above it, and you learn how to persevere, and you learn how to deal with issues rather than to deny them. And I guess that was what you had to do yourself personally.
Exactly. That's very true. And so it was my parents' life, in the sense I just received that by almost osmosis. It wasn't that I was consciously
Sure.
aware of, oh yes, this is what's happening to me. I'm learning all about this. But I saw how the faith of my parents sustained them through their entire life. And my father always stressed scripture reading, and we prayed a lot in our family. So that example was a very strong
What do you
one.
appreciate about your family? If you were able to pick out something out of all this, I mean, what would you say you really appreciate in your family life as you look back on it?
It was the heritage of faith.
Uh-huh.
Because that's the one thing that we can take to heaven with us, is those whom we have brought to the faith.
That
And-
sustained you all through your life and the difficulties that you went through that we're going to talk about here in a little bit.
Yes.
So you're really kind of saying that was a kind of a foundation stone for you
Definitely.
that you relied on and depended on and used.
Yes.
You know, as you went through some real strain yourself, which we're going to talk about,
Yes.
you know, just a little bit. But if you look at it the flip side, what was wrong, or what did you not like, or what would you wish not happened or done differently?
My mother's personality, my father used to describe as a little high-strung. She was a musician, and she was the oldest of 9 children. And again, they had come, her parents had come from Sweden, and she had accepted a lot of responsibility for these younger siblings, and she was a bright woman. She was very talented musically. She was very blessed to be able to go to the university. In that generation, to have a university degree was a little unusual. And so she was a talented person, but I think she didn't really like her life very much, because she was stuck in rural Minnesota in the first parish where I was born, and she had a lot more talent and ability to go out and do things, which
Sure.
she was able to do in later life, but she wasn't able at that time. So I think some of the ways that we have now of dealing with that kind of personality
Yep.
or that kind of stress,
Yep.
she would have benefited from, and in fact we all would have benefited
Well, you've all would have
from.
benefited from that as a
Exactly,
family.
yes.
Yeah.
So my father was kind of the mediator, and she was...
And that's what we tell families today. I mean, you know, if you have a stressful event in your life or a situation, you know, you have to deal with it. You got to face it. You got to talk about it. You have to work on it together. You have to bond together and deal with it. Face it on.
Yes.
But sometimes we don't want to do that.
Well, and in that generation, you often didn't
You don't talk about
about
things.
it.
Yeah, you don't talk about things. Yeah.
People just gutted through life, and they just endured, and it tore them up inside.
Yeah, yeah, it
And-
really did. Yeah.
And those around them, too, oftentimes.
You know, we referred to the fact that, you married. What year?
1963.
63. And at that time, you began kind of your own personal life and, out of the family into your own personal life. You married a man that had mental illness. Did you have knowledge that he was mentally ill when you married? Or did you marry a pretty normal man who became schizophrenic and mentally ill?
He was not only normal, he was super normal. He was a wonderful, talented, big man on campus. We went to a small Midwest school, and he was well known on the campus as being an outstanding student. He was a philosophy major. His philosophy instructor at that time said he was the most brilliant man he had in class. So he was extraordinary.
So that was quite a catch.
Oh, it was.
For you. I mean, that was quite a catch when coming, from a little town in Minnesota and going to the big city and finding somebody to marry and have that kind of quality. I mean, that was amazing start.
And he came from San Francisco, the city on the west. He had been born in the Midwest. No, he had been born in Greenwich, Connecticut. And then at a certain point, his father had become ill and they'd come back to the Midwest. So he had Midwest roots the way I did.
Oh, I see.
But then the family went to San Francisco, and his father passed away when he was 11. So that was a trauma in that family.
It is a trauma.
Yes.
When your father dies, when you're below the age of 12, you have enormous trauma in your life, and it will show up throughout life.
Interesting.
It shows up throughout life. It's a phenomenon that we just know about. It's kids who have fathers. It's fathers, who die before they're age 12. They somehow don't handle that very well, and they show the anxiety, the depression. They show all the disturbances of life from that point on.
Well, I'm sure he was very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And even though he had
he
had a loving mother who cared for him, he had a talented sister, but those seeds of disruption.
Well, seeds of being without. Without a family, without a father, being left alone.
Yes.
And being left behind. I mean, that kind of fear and anxiety, takes over.
Yes.
And when a kid is below to age 12, they can't process that. They can't think that thing through very well. And if you don't help them, then they suffer. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. This is kind of an interesting point about, how you married a man that on one hand to you was wonderful and then turned not so wonderful. And we're going to talk about that little story when we come back. So hang in there with us. I just want to give you this little quote before we end our first segment this morning and put it into perspective again. The quote is this: "Don't walk before me, I may not follow. Don't walk behind me, I may not lead. Just walk beside me and be my friend." That's really what it's about in life. That's what it's about in marriage. Sometimes he doesn't lead. Sometimes he doesn't walk before you. But you had a friendship, at least for a while.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that, okay? Go get a cup of coffee and come on back and join us in just a few minutes, okay?
The Green Gables Care Home is a 24-hour assisted living facility for the elderly located in Clovis, California, offering spacious private and semi-private rooms which are wheelchair approved, catering to the special person in your life who needs attention and wants to live in a loving home environment. The Green Gables Care Home has assisted living in secured homes for elderly with Alzheimer's, memory loss, and for your loved ones needing assistance with their activities of daily living. Call 559-297-9438 and visit greengablescarehome.com.
Sometimes good intentions hurt rather than help. For just $1.76 per meal, the Fresno Rescue Mission offers more than food. we offer hope. Please donate today.
Do you need a locksmith? Layman's Lock and Safe Service and Repair is available for you. 559-228-1805.
Gained a lot, learned a lot, and got a lot of love. If it weren't for the knowledge that I had gained from the classes at PCC, I probably wouldn't be the mom I am today. So there it goes.
I would love you to meet my son Aaron. My situation was very difficult. I didn't know how my life was going to turn out.
We graduated in June 2010 and we got married in July. And through family, the Pregnancy Care Center changed our lives.
The Pregnancy Care Center was a huge, vital part in helping me walk through that pregnancy, in educating me and loving on me during that time.
Choosing a Medicare plan can be difficult and frustrating. Susan Hatch can guide you through the Medicare maze and help find the right plan for you. Susan helps people understand the confusing and drastic changes that occur every year in Medicare. Susan will only recommend plans that will protect your assets and allow you to continue to see your personal doctor. As a 100% independent agent, Susan is not controlled by any particular insurance company to steer a person onto any one particular plan. Susan was awarded the #1 Medicare supplement agent in California. Look for Susan's Medicare question and answers every Monday in the Fresno Bee. Call Susan at 559-307-2287 and visit MedicareToday.net.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
All right, thanks for rejoining us today on our program, Dr. Teach Me to Parent. And Carolyn Lynn, a local author, local artist, and written a great book that we're really discussing today in considerable length. And it's a book for you for your summer reading, Loving a Beautiful Mind, Schizophrenia and an Amazing God. She tells the story of living with a man to whom she was married who became schizophrenic into the marriage, into the time of the marriage. And I think you were, before the break, Carolyn, you were kind of saying that when you married him, you did not know that he was mentally ill or that he was going to become mentally ill, however you want to say that.
I didn't even know anything about mental illness, so I wouldn't have recognized the signs if they were there.
Yeah, I see.
And the irony of this is my sisters both were registered nurses, and they knew about this medical condition. And my husband's sister is a doctor, was a doctor, and she knew about these things. So people all around me knew about mental illness.
But never said?
But I didn't.
And they never said anything to you by saying, Carolyn, be careful.
Well, in a way they did, but let me back up a little bit. Those first 5 years were just wonderful. He was in graduate school, and I was teaching high school English, and he had completed all of his coursework and his language requirements for his doctorate, and he was ready to do a dissertation, and he was studying the philosopher, 19th century philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Oh, yes.
And very profound thoughts, and I was so impressed with all of this and so proud of him. He made a wonderful presentation to other people when he made conversation. He was articulate, he was well-read, he was intelligent, and people loved to be around him. They loved to have
no indication.
No indication.
That you had at that point in time, 5 years now, living with a man that he, underneath it all, was mentally ill or was going to reflect a mental illness in his thinking and his behavior pattern. You just did not see it, didn't know it.
No, and the symptoms began when we had our family. We
I
waited
see.
for those early years. We waited for 6 years to start our family. And once the children came,
Now the stress levels build.
it did.
That's right.
And there were things expected of him. I could no longer teach, so he was had to support the family. And we, as it turns out, we had 2 babies 12 months apart. So it was boom, boom. And suddenly, again, the pressures built
That's
up.
schizophrenia. You know, when the stress builds up and you have to handle it and you don't know how to handle it, you don't do very well in handling it, then
Exactly.
that breakdown begins to take place.
And then I began to see the symptoms. We lived in Florida, and I walked into our bedroom. The babies were 2 and 3, and there was a gun on the dresser. And I said, Maynard, what's this? And he said, he had an office. He had rented an office space away from the house for his business ventures. That's where he was in his life at that point. And he said, well, someone in the office has a contract on my life, and I have to protect myself.
I see.
And I,
Now we're in trouble.
yes.
Now you can see the paranoia. Yes.
But I didn't realize it. You know, he
didn't.
was at the office. I mean, there could have been something going on there, but I thought to myself, why would anybody want to do us in? Here we're just this couple, you know, we're nice people, we're church people, he's an academic. Why would anybody want to
Yeah, you
kill
had
him?
nothing. You had no riches or whatever.
Exactly. And then another thing happened. He started to unscrew the faceplates on the light switches. And I said, why are you doing that? And he said, well, the people next door, this house must be bugged because they're hearing what I'm saying. Of course, that was voices.
There you are, see?
But
Yeah.
I didn't know those
And that way, that
things.
came in about 5 years after.
More like 7 or 8
But
by
when
the
the kids
time
were
born,
now starting
developing.
to put a demand on you as a,
Yeah.
that's schizophrenia.
And I
That's
was
right.
busy. You know, I couldn't take the time even to research schizophrenia because there was no internet. I would have had to go to the library and find books. I had 2 babies 12 months apart that were taking all of my time
Demanded
and
of
energy.
your time, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, and eventually it reached a point where there was a crisis and he needed to have a change.
But did he take care of the children in those early years or that first year of the children's life? Or did he really just leave that to you and he did his own thing?
No, actually, he loved the children
I see.
dearly, and he did. We shared that responsibility, and he loved being with them. I won't say he changed a lot of diapers,
Well,
but he would spend time
most
with
men
the
don't.
kids. No,
Yeah.
you know, and he would enjoy them because he loved them.
Uh-huh.
He loved them so much.
So he actually became involved in the life of the children.
Yes, he did.
Even though he had these thoughts that were strange and different, he could put those aside and kind of relate as a father to the children.
Well, ironically,
important, very important.
Yes, ironically, the children don't feel that now, and their experience growing up with him was different.
Well, a kid's memory doesn't kick in until about 7. You know, so when you think in terms of what happened in the first years of life, children may get a glimmer of something,
Yes.
but they don't know very much. They don't know the whole story. And it isn't until about 6, 7 that children put the story together. And very bright children do a little bit before that. But whatever happens before that is just kind of isolated events. So kids wouldn't know that, and that's probably what happened there.
And by the time they were aware, they knew there was something wrong with Dad, and they knew there was something, a problem. Because by that age, we had come to Fresno, and he was cycling through schizophrenic episodes, being hospitalized, being put on medication. That wasn't the right one, so he'd come home. We would try to maintain him on the medication, and either it made his skin crawl, or he felt an allergy to it, and pretty soon he would not take it anymore, and then he would slide into an episode, and we'd repeat that pattern over and over again for about 5 years, until we found a medication that worked for him, and until we found a Christian psychiatrist.
You know, that's really what happens in schizophrenia, is that there are a number of different medications. And back in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, you know, we didn't have really effective, you know, medications. And the medications we used had a lot of different side effects and had negative implications. So your experience is not uncommon, you know, to people who were using those medications and who had schizophrenia. So this is just like a second level of suffering.
Yes.
You had him, you had to deal with him and his weird ways of thinking. and then you had to deal with the secondary effects of the medication. So you had two things that you were trying to work with.
Well, and I tried to help him in every way I could, but we were going through the trauma of these repeated episodes, and the children would get involved. I mean, we all tried to help Dad. We all tried to be aware of what was going on, and even...
Would he let you help him? Did he want help? Did he let you help him? Was he open? Was he receptive?
Well, in a way, when he was in his worst state, he was overtaken by delusions. That's the third symptom of schizophrenia, as you know. And he wouldn't even know who I was.
I see.
I remember one time we called the sheriff, because we live in a county island, and we needed some help with him, and the officer asked him, "Who is this woman?" And he said, "Well, I think it's my wife, but she may be a demon." So he was...
Yes.
He was confused. He was in a delusory state of mind. And so at that time, I couldn't help him because he was
That's right. He
past the point.
rejected you, basically.
Yes.
That's right.
But up to that time, as he was episoding, we kind of worked together. And I told him that one of the symptoms for him of his schizophrenia is the voices would lead him to just walk the streets. And I always told him when he had that compulsions that was so strong that he had to walk the streets, then we had to hospitalize him. And he did not like the hospital. So that was a bargaining tool for us. And we
If you
would
walk, I put you in the hospital.
Exactly.
If you don't walk, you stay here. Yeah.
So there were various things we tried to do to keep him stable. But that was a horrendous time for all of us.
How did the kids handle that at that time? They're a little older now. They're more aware that Dad is unusual, he's different, he's problematic, he creates strain for them. Did they just avoid him? I mean, he'd come in the room, they'd leave? I mean, how did they handle that?
The kids were wonderful. They did things far beyond their age. They, in a sense...
It does. It has a maturing effect, or it has a opposite effect.
Well, they were forced to help in the problem. And... so they probably gave up part of their childhood in order to act more adult and to help solve his problems. And now they're having to deal with some of the after effects.
I think a lot of our kids in our community, live in that way. They live in a home where parents are ineffective for a lot of different reasons. They're just dysfunctional. And it's up to the kids to step up to the plate and be the parent. I mean, that's just dysfunctional family. No child should be the parent. And but there's a lot of kids that have to assume the role of the parent in our culture.
And it ended up bringing out the best in them, even though...
It does help in the long run.
And my son, who, since the financial struggles we were always in, he had strong math skills, so he went on and became a CPA. And my daughter, of course, she understood or was aware of the psychological struggles of the family, so she went ahead and eventually got a master's in counseling. So psychology was her field. And both of those fields were a direct result of the family.
Isn't it interesting how family life creates good?
Yes.
I mean, there may be evil in the family, but out of it can come good.
Well, and I see that as the Lord making something good out of our lives, because we trusted Him an awful lot.
And I'm sure it was on and off. I'm sure there was good and then there was not. It was just turned bad. Then it turned good and then it just turned bad. I'm sure it was up and down throughout a lot of years there. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Cycles.
Let's come on back and talk about that, because I think that's an excellent point of how you live with it over time. I mean, you can live with something, any stress you can live with for a short period of time. But when you have to live with it chronically, day after day, year after year, that's a different story.
That's right.
Let's come back and talk about that, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Go get a cup of coffee and come on back in just a few minutes, okay? Carol?
need a dentist who has a passion for superior aesthetics and comfort, you need Dr. Christopher Wong with Cedar North Dental. Call 559-432-4948 or visit cedarnorthdental.com.
Tanya, come here.
At Boys and Girls Clubs, it's not just about trying new things.
Kitchen in my hometown.
It's not about learning the right steps.
4,
Or making contact.
5, 6, 7, 8.
It's not about exploring the future. It's about helping them build it. It's about taking steps to greatness. About making a connection. It's about proving every kid and teen has what it takes. It's about people in our clubs who bring out the greatness in every kid who enters our doors. It's not just about being on stage. It's about walking across it. Great futures start here, and here, and here.
Sat7 is a Christian media network that uses uncensored satellite television to broadcast across the Middle East and North Africa, and is also available globally online.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
All right, thanks for coming back and rejoining us as we now pick up the next segment. Our talk today is with Carolyn Lynn, local author, local artist. But the unique thing about her, she's the author of this book, Loving a Beautiful Mind. This is her personal story of living with a man, married to a man who was schizophrenic and who had enormous difficulties in mental illness. After the first 5 years of their marriage, it went downhill, and it was a tremendous strain of living with somebody with who's mentally ill. So let's talk about that a little bit. That wasn't probably an everyday experience. I mean, he's mentally ill every day, but every day he was probably somewhat different. Some days he was reasonable and normal, and other days he was just out of control and out of reason. Is that what you live with?
Yes, and I have to tell you that once he was stabilized on medication and found a good psychiatrist, he was able to teach adjunct faculty, 10 years at Fresno State, 12 years at the community college. So he had a normalcy in his life. Mm-hmm. And he was able to use his gifts. And sometimes it would take great effort for him to get up and go to class and interact with students. But he loved it. And it became the thing that kept him going, because he could only teach 1 or 2 classes, but he was able to communicate with students. He was able to be out in a normal life, even though he still heard voices. But that gave him a sense of purpose, a sense of satisfaction that he lived with until the day he died. And that was just a wonderful experience. But that's where the ins and outs came, because he would be able to be normal when he went to class, but then he'd come home and he would tell me that he had heard the kids in the back of the room saying bad things about him. And I would remind him that he had an illness where he heard voices, that what he heard was not true, and then I would reinforce the good things that the students had said in evaluations.
See, you were the voice of reality.
I was.
You were the voice of reality for him, to help him see it in perspective and see reality and what was not reality.
That's right.
And that was a constant job that you, as a wife, had to play. That's what a therapist has to do, help them understand what's reality and what's not reality.
And give him his medication. That was the big thing, too.
Yeah, he lives on that. I
He
gather.
did.
I gather.
It was-
You lived on his medication.
It was very
Yeah.
important for him. I
Yeah.
mean, for us, that he be on medication, because without medication, they're just all over the place. You
Yeah.
can't deal. I couldn't have
Yeah.
lived with it.
But was there something good, though, that came out of this? I mean, this is a tremendous story of strain and stress on a family that's beyond normal, way beyond normal. So you kind of say nothing good can come from this. That's what you think.
Well, it did, in the sense that he contributed to the lives of so many students. In fact, there's one student, and they didn't know about the illness.
I see, uh-huh.
There's one student who was in his class who went into philosophy because of him.
Oh.
And for many years, she and her husband would attend the Philharmonic, Fresno Philharmonic concerts, and I would see her. And she went into philosophy, and she became an adjunct faculty
in philosophy.
Yes, she
You know, that's
did.
an honor to any professor.
Yes.
You know, this is one of the great honors of a professor, is to have a student become their surrogate, so to speak, and pick up the field where they leave off. That's a great honor, so I'm sure that was a success for him.
And she attributed her success to his influence.
Sure.
So that was thrilling. And there were other times too. Again, from the reviews that he got, the evaluations from his class, they commented that he was a very intelligent person. He was a compassionate, caring person. He listened to the students. He interacted with them, so that those evaluations pointed out those good things. And it's that information I could
Then you
repeat.
use that to help
Yes.
him see
Yes.
that he really was all right, or that
Yes.
there were good things about him.
That's right.
It wasn't all bad, yeah.
So he was able to live on a level of normalcy that was very important to him. And just in interacting with other people, he was able to maintain conversation. It exhausted him. So when he would come home from class or being with other people,
Sure.
he would go to bed and just rest, because he needed that kind
Well, he
of...
exhausted himself.
Yes,
I'm
he
sure
did.
he gave everything
Yes.
to the teaching and to the students, and then he just was drained.
Yes.
You know, your book has Loving a Beautiful Mind as a title. What's the beautiful mind?
Well, this refers back to 2002.
Oh, yes.
There was the best picture of the year was called A Beautiful Mind. And it
I
was
see.
the story of a schizophrenic man. In fact, he was a Nobel Prize winner, John Nash. And he was schizophrenic. And for the first time, the film portrayed what schizophrenia was like. In fact, it was very interesting how the filmmakers did it, because they drew you into his mind and into his life, and you thought that was reality, and then suddenly it exposed the fact that no, that wasn't reality. And I think that was a way of educating the public to what happens in the mind of one who is schizophrenic. And that, because that movie had such wide acclaim and became so popular, Russell Crowe was the actor, and his acting was very strong. And the film showed John Nash and his wife Alicia, and she helped him through his life.
I see.
However, the film didn't describe this, but she divorced him at a certain point and then remarried him later, and they had a son together. But his life was very similar to my husband's life, in the sense that an academic person who was very bright and a wife who was supportive. And so that's why I picked up on that and called
It's almost like that's the schizophrenia of it. That's the double-mindedness of it. The beautiful mind on one hand, but the ugly life, on the other.
Yes.
I mean, it's and you can't put those together. They are separate, and that's why we have schizophrenia. I mean, they are so separate in two different lives that people live. But the thankful thing is that he had a beautiful mind. He could think, and he could interact at the intellectual level and influence people intellectually. But in the interpersonal world, he just turned people off and hurt people.
Yes.
And hurt his family, hurt
That's
you.
it. That's just those closest to you, you do hurt. And so I had a real struggle through all of that time. And after he passed away, I had to deal with who I was
Sure.
as the broken person.
Sure.
And my children have had to
Your
deal
children
with,
too.
with the brokenness that came out of our life. So that we've spent a lifetime doing that.
And Maynard never knew about that.
Oh no, he couldn't have handled
He wouldn't
that.
have known about that. He died, but I mean, if had he lived, he wouldn't have been able to understand that. And but they would not have been able to help you, would not have been able to help the children think it through and work it through.
No, in fact, my daughter tried to communicate some of this to him when she got married, because she had a lot of struggles in her own mind that even affected her marriage.
Sure does, yeah.
And she tried to deal with this with him, and he was sensitive in the sense that he regretted so much that he had affected her, but he tried to make changes.
Couldn't do anything about it.
But he really couldn't
do
do
anything
that.
about it.
No. Yeah.
No, that's the sad part of it. You feel so helpless.
Yes.
You felt helpless. What could you do to make things better? I'm sure the children felt very helpless. They had nothing they could do. And he felt helpless. I mean, it's a story of helplessness.
It's just a terrible illness.
It is.
Yes.
It's painful.
Yes.
And everybody suffers, and but we somehow survive above that. But again, even in the midst of evilness, comes good.
Yes.
And again, even the kids can say there were some good things that came into their life as a result. They learned a few things.
Oh, definitely. And I had dear friends who helped me through the walk. I had some dear friends down the street that I would come to, and I would cry out to them and say, help me.
Yeah, we need a support system.
Yes, we do.
The children need a support system. You need a support system. He needed a support system.
Yes.
He would go to a doctor and have his session, so to speak, and that's his support system. He had his medication. That's his support system. But you didn't have that.
That's right.
So you have to find your own support system.
And after he passed away, I developed that through some of the fun things that I did, because at that point I was retired and I was able to experience a different kind of life.
That's the good part of it.
That's the good part
That's
of
the
it.
good thing comes out of this.
Yes.
You can say goodbye and now move on, and you have another phase of your life.
Yes.
Which you move on and now become an author,
That's
you
right.
become an artist, you're enjoying this, you're learning a new language, you're learning a new culture of the French.
That's
I mean,
right.
you're doing a lot of good things now. Let's
Well-
come back and talk about that.
All right.
The you today
Okay.
versus the you
Then.
before.
All right.
Okay, get a cup of coffee and we'll come back for a last segment here.
Hey there, world. I'd like to introduce you to someone really special and really cool. This is my mom. My mom is an amazing person. She is a writer. She is a newly transplanted Texan. She is a woman of faith and she loves 80s music. She also is a person with a very rare genetic muscular disorder called Pompe disease.
Pompe disease is a terminal, progressive illness. It's a genetic enzyme deficiency which ultimately leads to the destruction of your skeletal muscles. Those are the muscles that control how you move, your arms, your legs, and your torso. When your jaw or esophageal muscles are affected, you can no longer eat and require a feeding tube. When your diaphragm is impacted, you can't breathe on your own any longer and require a trach ventilator. When your legs are impacted, you will no longer be able to walk without assistance. You can lose bladder and bowel control. It affects children and adults, and eventually it kills you. It is rare, but it's real.
Now, we're lucky. My mom's still able to walk, though she uses a cane to get around most of the time. She's still able to breathe unassisted, but she can't go upstairs, and she needs some kind of assistance to get up from a seated position, like if she's sitting in a chair. She has to examine every activity ahead of time to know if there are things like handicap parking, accessible buildings, and even functional bathrooms. All of her activities depend heavily on the weather. A windy day can be just as dangerous as an icy one. She jokes that you can tell what kind of day she's having by whether she can lift her arms high enough to do her hair. And she recently moved into a one-story house specifically with the idea that she's one day going to need a wheelchair to get around. Those are the kind of things she has as everyday concerns. Her normal everyday fears are things like dropping her keys or falling in public and not being able to get up. That actually happened a couple of years ago. She fell and fractured her pelvis because she was unable to break her fall.
I receive an enzyme replacement therapy every 2 weeks for life. It's a 6-hour IV. It helps slow the progression of the disease, but it is not a cure. And it costs about $100,000 every time you sit in a chair. Insurance takes care of most of that if you're lucky, but not everyone is, and the expenses add up very quickly. Things like wheelchairs, accessible vehicles, special housing, travel costs to medical conferences, doctor's appointments, and clinical trials. Luckily, there is a group that helps families with Pompe handle these costs. The United Pompe Foundation is a group connecting funds with real people who need help. This was founded by a father whose son has Pompe disease, and they could not find the resources that they needed. They assist patients and their families with medical costs and other expenses that they need to survive day to day. Every little bit helps.
There are a lot of things in life that we really take for granted, and sometimes the scariest things in the world are the things that you can't see. So today we're asking for you to help us shed a little light on a rare and scary disease. Please share this video with your friends, your family, strangers, anybody that you come across. Education is a big thing, it makes a big difference, and another way to make a really huge difference in someone's life is to go check out the United Pompeii Foundation. Their website is in this video description. Click on it, check it out, and go ahead and donate some money if you're able to. Again, this is an organization giving real help to real people who are amazing and need it, like my mom. I love her, and thank you so much for helping us out. Thank you so much.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
All right, thanks for joining us again and coming back and picking up our conversation with Carolyn Lind, author of this book, and I want you to know about it because this is a book to read this summer, Loving a Beautiful Mind, her story of her own husband living with a man who had schizophrenia and the struggles that she and her family went through having to deal with a man that was out of contact with reality and creating an enormous amount of strain and stress on the family. And then coming out of it alive, so to speak, coming out of it whole, coming out of it so where you now have your own life. You can say goodbye to that life. He died. Say goodbye to him, goodbye to that life, and now move on in your own life. Have you done that? Have you been able to kind of move forward, or are you stuck?
No, I'm not stuck. I'm just so grateful that I have had a wonderful, rich life. And he passed away the same year that we both retired from the community college system. And since that time, I've been doing a lot of things that have fed me, that have nourished me. And that was so important because I was, as I said before, I was broken by this time.
Well, you put everything on hold.
Yes.
The things that you wanted to do, you couldn't do. I mean, that's disappointing.
Yes.
And that's part of being broken. I mean, the disappointment after disappointment. I gather that's what you were really feeling, was just the loss of opportunity, the loss of challenge.
And there were so many losses that I had. I didn't know what a normal marriage was like.
Sure.
I didn't know what a normal family was like in interactions. I didn't know a long-term relationship with my husband was like. I didn't have a chance to watch him develop into a mature, respected individual in the way that I had expected, because I had thought certainly that he would be a leader in his community,
Sure.
and that he would perhaps be a college president or certainly a college
Those are the expectations
professor.
you had when you were married.
That's
Yeah,
it.
That's right.
All those expectations. And then the question came up, do I leave this man?
Well, that's the question that I was wondering about. Why didn't you divorce a man? I mean, here's a man that created pain for you, pain for your children. Most people would have just said, I'm done, I'm out of here.
Well,
why not?
That's what my family said too. And these people that knew about schizophrenia, but they all lived thousands of miles away from me, and we were by ourselves in California, and they were in the Midwest. So my family wasn't close by.
The support system was only by phone.
That's right. And on top of that, I loved the man, and I wanted to help him in whatever way I could. At the same time, I knew that if I divorced him, I would probably stay around living in this area. And even though at times the children wish I would have divorced him, they don't know how difficult life would have been for me and for them.
It is.
Because without a partner, it would have been extremely difficult.
You think you had troubles before?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, you would have many, many more troubles. That's right.
And even more than that, that if he would not have been in the house with us, he would have been out there someplace. And undoubtedly, he would have gone off his medication. And you know that 30% of the people who are on the streets, living on the streets,
They're mentally ill.
Mentally ill. And so he would have come knocking at my door wanting to see his children. And I would have been the barrier to that. I would have been the bad guy, and I think my life could have been in danger.
Yes.
And the children's could have been in danger. So all of those things made it much more practical in a way for me to make sure he had his medication, to try to help him. And he was a gentle person.
It's a balance, though. You have to balance the idea of the pain of a divorce and what life would be like versus the pain of staying in the relationship.
That's right.
It's painful.
Yes.
But the relativeness of it.
And I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I stayed with him. I remember that the year of our 40th wedding anniversary, and we were married 41 years, although about 35 of those he was sick, but the year of our 40th wedding anniversary, we were visiting relatives in Hawaii, and we walked to the beach, the two of us, and we sat down on the sand, and he said some beautiful things to me. He told me he loved me. He told me that he was sorry this had been a difficult life. He didn't really have the understanding to know how it had affected me, but he told me how much he loved us and the children. And I told him how much I admired that he had, despite his illness, been able to be a functioning person.
In spite of all this, he continued to have that love for the children.
He did.
That you spoke about when they were born in the early years of their life. That maintained itself, the love of his children.
And I don't know that they always felt it because of his derangement. But
interference. I mean, it's a double message, so to speak. Yeah.
But he did love them. And that was, in a way, that was a beautiful denouement to our life because he died a year later. And that way, I felt that we had kind of shared our deepest thoughts with one another, even though that was probably the deepest we got because of his illness, we were not able to share.
You could not come into deep relationships.
No, we couldn't. And I missed that. I really missed that.
Yeah. But when you have a man that has a message to share with the world, you want to do everything you can to help him get that message out. So, I mean, it's kind of like your role of a wife, to kind of support him, but also to facilitate what he really has to contribute.
And that's what I always wanted to do from the very beginning, even though before I knew about his illness. I wanted to be this support person for this man I loved dearly and could see the huge potential. I was always a great second in command person. I was not the leader of everything, but I was a great backup person. And that's what I wanted to be in his life. I ended up being that in like my jobs and in my church work. Yeah. But in his life, that's the role I wanted to take.
You played that role, but somebody had to play that role in your life too. You don't make it without having people in your life being supportive and encouraging and somebody you can talk to and somebody that gives you answers and gives you alternatives and ideas of how to handle situations. You can't do it alone. Nobody can do this alone.
That's right. So I relied on my dearest friends, my closest friends, and they were wonderful. They're always there for me.
Did you have a church that was supportive or helpful? I mean, did you have a
faith,
club? Did you have an organization that you belonged to that was helpful?
It was the faith, and it was my church. The church stood with us. They knew my husband. He sang in the choir. He was on committees during his younger days when he was feeling better. So they were a supportive group, and that was wonderful. But I had a very strong personal relationship with a God who's powerful and who would meet my need with a Bible verse or with with a person or with an action or something.
Something would happen in a unique way at a right time in your life.
That would let me know that that was my answer to the fact that God loved me and was watching over me. So that really became my support, and my faith grew enormously. And my book tells a lot about my faith journey. And this book covers a period after the children left home. I went to college, and I was alone with the illness. And suddenly I had really thought I wasn't sure I could handle that. So that's when my faith really grew. And the period that my book covers is that period where my personal life grew because of the reality of this living God within me, who showed me. He became the lover of my soul. He became the one who met my needs. He became my husband without being my,
Well, I mean, in a sense, with the children gone,
yes.
I mean, you felt very much alone, maybe threatened, and maybe feeling very vulnerable, so to speak.
Well, he was there, and that was the wonderful part about it, because I learned dimensions about that relationship and that love with him that I had never really had the time to investigate because I was so busy taking care of other people.
Sure.
That's the way life is.
Let me ask this question. We're going to kind of wrap it up here a little bit, but there are a lot of people that live life that you live. A lot of people live with somebody in the family that's mentally ill. Somebody lives in a family where a child is just disturbed, distressed, angry, defiant, uncontrollable. Sometimes we have marriages like that. That just addiction and drug addiction, alcohol addiction, marijuana addiction, all the addictions we have today. I mean, there are a lot of people. You aren't alone.
I know.
You're not alone. I mean, you had your road to hoe, but everybody does. We all have these kind of difficult circumstances we're in, and we look for answers. You're the answer lady.
Well,
what can you tell people who are in that kind of situation? What's your advice?
Well, first of all, I'd say get help. At the time our journey started in the 1970s, there were not a lot of support groups for mental illness.
That's right.
Now there are. There's a group called NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And that group, which started after we were involved already, I did hook into that group the last few years before my husband died. And I was part of a faith-based support group that met once a month, that met once a month. And we were all lay people. There was no one professional there, but we all shared our experiences because we were family members of those with mental illness.
When you're going through stress, you want support from people who are going through stress as you're going through it.
Yes.
And like you've gone through it and have gone on it and gone through it before you.
Yes.
So they understand. They appreciate what you're going and can be of support and help.
They can give you advice. They can tell you how they did it. So that's one source. NAMI would be a wonderful source for anyone who's going through mental health problems with a family member.
Good.
And also the patients themselves, or they call them the consumers themselves. There are support groups for them in NAMI as well. So I would suggest get help. Don't walk this road alone because it's such a difficult road.
It is.
And we happen to walk it because we had to walk it more or less alone. But now there are places, there's help. So that I would first suggest that. And in my particular case, it threw me more forcefully into my faith because I knew from my own family and my own upbringing that had been their support during difficult times.
And you said you had a church, though, that also came to the occasion and helped you.
They were
That would be an idea for make sure people become part of the church again. Go back to church if you've gone away from it.
And in our church, we happen to have a prayer chain where you call in and there are people who are prayers. That's a wonderful thing to hook into. When you've got a crisis or a difficulty, just call and say, put my name on the prayer chain. This is my need. And you have other people praying with you.
I see.
So that's a powerful help.
What about the professional community? How helpful are they generally to you? How have they been to you? You talked about psychiatry, you've talked about psychology, you talked about some counseling. Did you find help in the professional community?
We did in kind of a limited way. It was once at the very beginning when Maynard was trying to find medication that helped. He also needed a psychiatrist. And at that time, psychiatry was saying that religion was part of your problem rather than part of the answer. So we knew that a lot of psychiatrists had that frame of thinking. But fortunately, we did find some very good people. So that to begin with, when Maynard was learning about his illness and trying to function in the real world instead of a delusory world, that helped us. And if you're able to find someone who can speak to you, or a therapist who spoke to us, well, and you know that you helped us a few times because.
And there are a lot of people that came forward.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right. Who walked with us on our
journey. You don't get help from one person.
No.
You get help from many.
Well, and your word for today, when you talk about walking with someone,
yes,
we had people who walked with us, and that was a help.
Yeah, they're your friend, and they'll lead you along the way.
That's right. So that I would suggest that you find people who have either walked your journey, or who can give some professional advice, or who can give support group advice. All those things will help, because it's a very hard journey.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. That's a super story. It's a heartwarming. It's a tough story.
Yes.
But thanks for sharing it.
You're welcome.
And I hope that we all benefit, from some of the guidance you've given us, and some of the suggestions, and some of the things we can do to get through our tough times in life.
I hope so.
Let me give you a quote just before we end today, and put this into perspective for yourself, okay? Victory belongs to the most persevering. Napoleon said that. So why don't you kind of get that idea in your own mind? Victory belongs to the most persevering. And Carolyn, you had to persevere.
Yes.
Your story is one of perseverance. And
yes,
that's why you succeeded, and that's why it came out better than it could have,
yes,
would have otherwise.
It does. And also, there's a verse in Scripture, may I say, that Romans 8:28, in all things God works together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So that's what happened in our lives, and the story is still unfolding in the next generation.
Thank you much.
You're
That's
welcome.
a good point to end on.
Mm-hmm.
Bye for now, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
CentralValleyTalk.com